The stars seemed particularly vigilant tonight, Professor Elias Morgan thought as he adjusted the massive radio telescope. The crisp mountain air bit at his exposed fingers while he recorded the night's celestial observations. At 34, he had already established himself as one of the world's leading authorities on extraterrestrial signal analysis, though his colleagues often joked that he'd been exiled to this remote observatory in Colorado's Rocky Mountains because he related better to distant stars than to people. Another anomaly in the Andromeda Quadrant, he muttered to himself, noting the pattern that had been recurring for weeks. The signal patterns defied conventional explanation, too structured to be random cosmic noise, yet not matching any known natural phenomenon. His research assistant, Maya Wilson, peered over his shoulder at the readouts. "That's the third time this week, Professor. NASA still claiming its instrument error?" "Of course they are," Elias replied with a hint of bitterness. "Easier to dismiss than admit there might be something out there we don't understand." The observatory's ancient coffee machine gurgled in the background and the first tremor shook the building. Coffee mugs rattled against each other as the vibration intensified. "Earthquake?" Maya grabbed the doorframe. Elias shook his head, his eyes drawn to the window where a brilliant streak of light tore across the night sky. Too localized. He was already grabbing his jacket and keys. "That's an impact event, maybe 10 miles from here in the national forest. You can't seriously be thinking of." "Log the coordinates," he called back, already halfway to his weathered Jeep. The drive through the winding forest roads was treacherous in the dark, but the lingering glow on the horizon guided him. When fallen trees blocked the fire road, Elias continued on foot, hiking nearly 2 miles through dense pine forest until the smell of scorched earth and something else, something chemical yet organic, filled his nostrils. The impact site was smaller than he expected, a crater perhaps 30 feet across with silvery debris scattered throughout. But it wasn't the crater that stopped Elias in his tracks, it was the figure struggling to emerge from what appeared to be a damaged pod. Humanoid but clearly not human. Slender, with skin the pale blue-white of distant stars, marbled with darker blue veins. Where human hair would grow, this being had what looked like delicate tendrils that moved slightly, independently of the wind. Most striking were her eyes, large, entirely violet with no discernible pupils, yet clearly struggling to focus in Earth's unfamiliar light. "Hello?" Elias called softly, approaching with palms visible. "I'm not going to hurt you." The being startled, then spoke, not with sound but directly into his mind, though the telepathic communication seemed fragmented, unstable. "Asylum, seek, political exile." Then she collapsed. As Elias rushed forward to help, he noticed her skin remained dark, unlike the descriptions in theoretical xenobiology of bioluminescent beings from the Andromeda galaxy. Checking for injuries, he found an apparatus attached to her spine, some kind of breathing assistance device. Carefully lifting her surprisingly light form, Elias made a decision that would forever alter his life's trajectory. Instead of calling authorities, he would take her back to his private research cabin. Something in those violet eyes had spoken of intelligence, fear, and a profound loneliness he recognized in himself. Hours later, as dawn broke over the mountains, she awakened on his couch. After initial panic, the telepathic communication stabilized enough for basic understanding. "Astrea," she conveyed, touching her chest. "Princess of Luminera. Defective. Exiled. Unwanted." "Elias," he replied simply, touching his own chest. Then, making sure she understood, he added, "You are wanted here. You are safe." Her violet eyes widened in what he would later learn was her people's expression of deep emotion. For the first time in her life, Princess Astrea, born without the luminescent qualities revered by her people, her telepathy limited by a developmental anomaly, encountered something entirely new, acceptance without condition. Neither could know that this moment would spark a connection that would eventually bridge worlds. The mountain cabin transformed over the weeks that followed. Elias converted his study into a living space for Astrea, adjusting the lighting to accommodate her sensitive vision and installing humidifiers to match the atmospheric composition she needed. Astronomical charts and physics textbooks were replaced with impromptu language guides and cultural exchange notes scribbled in two distinct handwritings, one human, one decidedly not. The concept is similar to our stellar navigation principles, Astrea explained one evening, her telepathic communication growing stronger daily. She sat cross-legged on the cabin's wooden floor, demonstrating mathematical equations with an elegant precision that made Elias's human notations seem clumsy by comparison. Yet you calculate dimensional shifts we've only theorized, Elias replied, watching her slender blue fingers trace patterns in the air. Your people's understanding of cosmic strings makes our string theory look primitive. Astrea tilted her head, the tendrils framing her face moving in a pattern he'd come to recognize as contemplative. Knowledge without compassion leaves one in darkness, she communicated. My people possess great scientific understanding but fail to value diversity of being. Elias understood the unspoken reference to her condition. Though Astrea never complained, he'd learned enough about Luminaran physiology to understand how her differences affected her. The respiratory apparatus she wore compensated for weakened lung development. Her lack of bioluminescence, a trait all Luminarans used for both communication and attracting mates, had marked her as defective from birth. Most painful was her limited telepathy, which on her world was like missing a primary sense. Their loss is my gain, Elias said simply, reaching out to adjust her breathing apparatus where it had shifted uncomfortably. The easy intimacy of the gesture hung in the air between them. Astrea's violet eyes widened, and for a moment, Elias thought he saw the faintest flicker beneath her skin, gone so quickly he convinced himself he'd imagined it. Their days fell into a rhythm. Morning spent with Elias teaching Earth customs, everything from using a toaster to understanding human emotional expressions. Afternoons devoted to Astrea sharing Luminaran science, helping Elias advance his research by decades. Evenings often found them outside, bundled against the mountain chill, stargazing from the deck as Astrea pointed out her distant home world, visible only as a faint pinprick of light near Andromeda. Your atmosphere makes the stars seem as if they're dancing, she conveyed one night, her mental voice tinged with wonder. On Luminara, the sky remains constant, unchanging. Beautiful but predictable. Like your people? Elias asked gently. Yes. Her tendrils drooped slightly. Perfection is valued above all. That which cannot be perfected must be hidden away or discarded. Her gaze dropped to her hands, which lacked the luminescent patterns adorning other Luminarans. I was to be married to a provincial governor, hidden in a remote outpost where my royal bloodline would provide advantage without my imperfections causing embarrassment. When I refused, it provided the perfect excuse during the coup to exile me completely. Elias moved closer, his shoulder touching hers as they sat on the deck swing. Earth has its own troubled history with differences. We're still learning, still growing. He gestured toward the valley below, where the lights of a small town twinkled. But there's beauty in imperfection, in the unexpected. It's what makes discovery possible. The moment shifted when the secure satellite phone inside began ringing, the one connected to the observatory and, by extension, to the government officials who had been briefed about Astrea's presence after Maya had inevitably discovered what Elias had done. Director Collins from Xenological Research arrived the next morning with two silent men in black tactical gear. Elias met them at the base of the property, blocking their ascent to the cabin where Astrea waited. The agreement was observation only, Elias stated firmly. No interference, no testing. Collins, a hawk-faced woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, surveyed the mountainside with critical eyes. That was before we understood the full potential of the knowledge she possesses. The national security implications alone. She's a political refugee, not a technology to exploit, Elias interrupted. She's an alien life form with information that could advance human science by centuries, Collins countered. Our facility in Nevada would provide everything she needs while allowing proper study. She's not leaving, Elias said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. She stays under my protection per the initial agreement, or I release everything I know about first contact protocols being violated to every scientific journal and news outlet globally. The standoff lasted several tense seconds before Collins signaled her men to stand down. You have 2 weeks to produce tangible scientific documentation from your guest. After that, we reassess. Her eyes narrowed. Your career was built on objectivity, Morgan. This emotional attachment is uncharacteristic and concerning. After they departed, Elias found Astrea waiting on the deck, her expression troubled. They fear me, she communicated. They fear what they don't understand, he corrected, joining her. And they covet what they can't control. You defended me, she observed. At potential cost to yourself. Elias looked at her, really looked at her. The alien features that had once seemed so strange now appeared beautiful in their uniqueness. The dark blue veins beneath her pale skin created patterns more artistic than any tattoo. Her tendrils moved with a grace that human hair could never achieve. Even her breathing apparatus seemed like an elegant ornament rather than a medical necessity. Some things are worth protecting, he said simply. That night, as a thunderstorm rolled across the mountains, Astrea experienced rain for the first time. Elias found her standing in the downpour, face upturned, tendrils swaying in the wind. To his astonishment, where the raindrops touched her skin, tiny momentary flickers of light appeared, as if her dormant bioluminescence responded to the electrical charge in the air. When she turned to him, water streaming down her face in a way indistinguishable from tears, something shifted between them. I feel. She began, her telepathic communication wavering with emotion. I feel seen. Elias stepped into the rain beside her, taking her hands in his. You are seen. Completely. The storm intensified around them, but neither moved to seek shelter. Thunder crashed overhead as Elias gently, hesitantly, raised one hand to trace the curve of her face, a question in the touch. Astrea answered by leaning into his palm, her violet eyes holding his with an intensity that transcended species. Beneath his fingertips, he felt it again, the faintest pulse of light, responding to his touch like a heartbeat. Somewhere in the distance, Director Collins's helicopter departed down the mountain, but neither of them noticed. In that moment, their worlds had narrowed to just this, two beings from distant stars, standing in the rain, discovering that the universe's greatest force transcended biology, physics, and the vast emptiness of space. The mountain spring brought transformation to the forest surrounding the cabin, and to its inhabitants. As wildflowers erupted in vibrant colors across the meadows, something equally colorful was blossoming between Elias and Astrea. Their morning routines gained a new intimacy. Elias found himself lingering when helping adjust Astrea's breathing apparatus, his fingers brushing against the sensitive skin at the nape of her neck. Astrea, in turn, began sitting closer during their study sessions, occasionally resting her hand on his arm when communicating complex ideas telepathically, the contact deepening their connection. Your cellular structure responds differently to mine, she observed one afternoon as they sat in the sunlit kitchen. Her slender blue finger traced a pattern on his forearm, leaving goosebumps in its wake. The electrical impulses increase when we touch. Elias swallowed hard, watching her curious exploration of his skin. It's called attraction among humans, he explained, his voice rougher than intended. A physiological response to wanting closer contact. Her violet eyes met his. We have similar responses on Luminara, though primarily expressed through light patterns. A flicker of sadness crossed her features. Another way I was considered deficient. Without thinking, Elias reached out, cupping her face gently. There's nothing deficient about you. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken possibility. Astria's tendrils swayed forward, brushing against his wrists in what he now recognized as an affectionate gesture. "I experience wanting," she admitted, the telepathic communication imbued with vulnerability. "For closeness I've never known. Is that acceptable?" Instead of answering with words, Elias leaned forward slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished. Their foreheads touched first, a gesture common to both their species, before he gently pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was tentative, exploratory. Her lips were cooler than a human's, with a slight metallic sweetness that reminded him of mountain springs. When they parted, Elias was stunned to see faint pulses of light beneath her skin, concentrated around her heart and throat. "Astria," he whispered, "you're glowing." She looked down in astonishment at the soft blue luminescence flickering beneath her pale skin, the bioluminescence that had remained dormant her entire life. "This isn't possible," she communicated, emotion making her telepathy waver. "The physicians said my light-producing cells were non-functional." "Perhaps they only needed the right stimulus," Elias suggested, tracing the path of light along her collarbone. The touch ignited something primal in both of them. Their next kiss was deeper, hungrier. Astria's tendrils wrapped gently around his neck and shoulders, creating a connection unlike anything Elias had experienced, each tendril a point of intimate contact, each pulse of light beneath her skin matching the racing of his heart. They moved to his bedroom as afternoon sunlight filtered through pine branches, casting dappled patterns across tangled sheets. Their exploration of each other was equal parts scientific discovery and tender passion. "Tell me if anything feels uncomfortable," Elias murmured against her skin, hyper-aware of their physiological differences. "Everything feels illuminating," she responded, her telepathic voice rich with new sensation as her body responded to his touch with increasingly vibrant pulses of light. Elias discovered the sensitive spots where her breathing apparatus connected to her spine required gentler attention. Astria learned that human males responded intensely to certain touches, delighting in each gasp and shudder she elicited. The tendrils framing her face proved exquisitely sensitive, and when Elias stroked them gently, the light beneath her skin pulsed brighter. Their joining was careful at first, mindful of differences in biology, but those concerns quickly dissolved in the rhythm they found together. As pleasure built between them, Astria's bioluminescence grew stronger until her entire body emitted a soft blue glow that filled the room with ethereal light. At the height of their passion, something extraordinary happened. Astria's telepathic ability surged, creating a feedback loop of sensation. For precious moments, Elias experienced their lovemaking from both perspectives simultaneously, feeling his own pleasure and hers in an overwhelming communion of minds and bodies. When they finally lay entwined in the aftermath, Astria's body continued to pulse with gentle light, illuminating the tears on her cheeks. "I never knew," she communicated, wonder and vulnerability mingling in her thoughts. "That connection could be like this. That I could be like this." Elias traced the still glowing patterns across her skin. "Your people were wrong about you," he said softly. "Your light was never absent, just waiting for the right moment to emerge." The weeks that followed were the happiest of either of their lives. Their days were filled with shared research, Elias documenting enough of Astria's scientific knowledge to keep Director Collins temporarily appeased while carefully omitting anything that could be weaponized. Their nights were spent exploring the new dimension of their relationship, each encounter strengthening Astria's emerging bioluminescence and telepathic abilities. Yet paradise was fragile. The government's deadline approached, and Elias noticed increasing surveillance, unmarked vehicles on the forest road, occasional drone flights over the property. "They won't simply leave us be, will they?" Astria asked one night as they lay watching stars through the skylight above his bed, her body casting enough light that Elias hadn't needed to turn on a lamp. "Bureaucracies fear what they can't control," he answered, pulling her closer. "And you represent the ultimate unknown." What neither of them realized was that human authorities weren't their only concern. High in Earth's orbit, a Luminoran scout vessel had detected the distinctive energy signature of their species' bioluminescence, a signature that, according to all records, Princess Astrea couldn't possibly produce. The ship's commander, Theron, studied the readings with growing interest. The royal family had dispatched him to recover the exiled princess after the counter-coup's success, expecting a simple retrieval mission. The unexpected development of her dormant abilities complicated matters significantly. Prepare for covert surface observation, he ordered his crew. The princess appears to have evolved during her exile. The council will want to understand how before we proceed with extraction. Back in the mountain cabin, blissfully unaware of approaching forces from two worlds, Elias and Astrea made love as a meteor shower streaked across the night sky. With each passing day, her light grew stronger, her telepathic abilities more controlled. What had begun as flickers now manifested as intricate patterns across her skin, patterns that, on her homeworld, conveyed deepest emotions and unbreakable bonds. I never believed I would experience this, she communicated, her thoughts flowing effortlessly into his mind as their bodies moved together. To be whole. To be loved. You were always whole, Elias whispered against her luminous skin. I only helped you see it. As dawn approached, they lay peacefully entwined, unaware that both human and alien forces were converging on their sanctuary. Their private universe of acceptance and discovery was about to collide with the harsh realities of two worlds unprepared for what their union represented, proof that connection transcended not just disability, but the very stars themselves. The morning birdsong was interrupted by the distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors. Elias bolted upright, instantly alert. Through the bedroom window, he spotted 3 black helicopters approaching from the south, government helicopters. They're coming for you, he told Astrea, who was already rising, her luminescence dimming with anxiety. Get dressed. We need to move quickly. Years of solitary mountain living had prepared Elias for contingencies. Within minutes, they had packed essential supplies, Astrea's atmospheric supplements, portable power for her breathing apparatus, provisions, and the encrypted drives containing their shared research. The emergency tunnel, Elias explained, pulling back the workshop storage cabinet to reveal a narrow passage. An old mining shaft, I expanded. It exits 2 miles north, away from where they're approaching. As they prepared to enter the tunnel, Astrea suddenly froze, her tendrils extending rigidly, a posture Elias had never seen before. What is it? He asked, tension evident in his voice. Her violet eyes widened. Luminoran energy signatures, she communicated, her telepathy sharp with alarm. A scout vessel has entered low orbit. They've found me too. The revelation struck Elias like physical blow. How? Your people believed you couldn't produce bioluminescence. But now I can, she replied, a flicker of understanding crossing her features. My light, they must have detected it. No time remained for further discussion. The helicopters were landing in the clearing below the cabin as Elias sealed the hidden door behind them, plunging them into darkness broken only by the soft blue glow emanating from Astrea's skin, a light that had once been her greatest joy now potentially leading their pursuers directly to them. They moved through the narrow tunnel by the illumination of her bioluminescence, emerging eventually into a secluded forest glade where ancient pines provided cover. From this vantage point, they could see both the cabin, now surrounded by tactical vehicles and personnel, and, more alarmingly, the distinctive shimmer of a cloaked Luminoran craft settling into a meadow half a mile east. Two groups that want to control you, neither of which sees you as a person with rights, Elias muttered, scanning the terrain with binoculars. We need to reach my secondary research station near the old observatory. From there, we can access communications, maybe negotiate. Elias, Astrea interrupted, her telepathic voice somber. My people wouldn't send a retrieval team unless circumstances had changed significantly. Before Elias could respond, movement at the edge of the forest caught his attention. A figure was approaching, humanoid but clearly not human, wearing the distinctive silver-blue armor of the Luminaran Royal Guard. Behind this alien, two dark-suited government agents followed at a cautious distance, weapons drawn but not raised. "Commander Theron," Astrea communicated, recognition evident in her thoughts. The commander stopped several yards away, removing his helmet to reveal features similar to Astrea's but with pronounced luminescent patterns across his skin that pulsed with what Elias recognized as formal communication signals. "Princess Astrea," Theron said aloud in accented but clear English, evidently for the benefit of the human agents. "The counter-coup has succeeded. Your royal parents have reclaimed the throne and request your immediate return." Elias felt Astrea stiffen beside him. For what purpose, she projected, her telepathy strong enough now that even the human agents seemed to perceive it, judging by their startled expressions. "Restoration of the royal line," Theron answered, his expression carefully neutral. "Your condition is no longer considered disqualifying." "How convenient," Elias interjected coldly. "Now that she's developing abilities your people claim she couldn't have, suddenly she's worthy of return." Director Collins emerged from the tree line, flanked by more agents. "Professor Morgan, this is now an international, or rather, interplanetary, diplomatic situation. Stand down and turn over the alien princess. She has a name," Elias snapped, "and rights, and choices." "Indeed she does," Theron agreed unexpectedly. "Princess Astrea, I am authorized to inform you that your unique perspective is now valued by the Council. The faction that sought your exile has been removed from power. Your parents recognize their error in sending you away." Astrea's hand found Elias's, squeezing tightly. "And if I choose not to return?" A ripple of light patterns played across Theron's skin, the Luminaran equivalent of discomfort. "Relations with Earth hang in delicate balance, Princess. Your return would facilitate diplomatic harmony." "Blackmail," Elias translated. "Return or your people will consider Earth hostile." Collins stepped forward. "Alternatively, Ms. Astrea could remain under Earth protection as a political refugee. Our facilities would ensure her safety while we negotiate formal diplomatic relations with Luminara." "Your facilities," Elias said bitterly. "You mean your laboratories?" The standoff intensified as more personnel from both sides emerged from the trees, surrounding them in an ever-tightening circle. Elias felt the weight of Astrea's breathing apparatus in the backpack he carried. Without her regular atmospheric supplements, she would begin struggling to breathe within hours. They couldn't run forever. "There appears to be no option where we remain together," Astrea communicated privately to Elias, her telepathy now controlled enough to target only him. "There's always another way," he insisted, though uncertainty tinged his thoughts. The tension broke when one of the government agents raised his weapon suddenly, startled by the unexpected emergence of a deer from the underbrush. The movement triggered a defensive reaction from Theron's guards, whose armor emitted a threatening pulse of energy. In that chaotic moment, something extraordinary happened. As weapons trained on Elias from multiple directions, Astrea stepped forward, her body erupting in blinding luminescence that surpassed anything she had previously produced. A telepathic wave emanated from her with such force that every being in the clearing, human and Luminaran alike, staggered under its impact. "Enough!" The mental command reverberated through the minds of all present with stunning clarity. What followed was not merely communication but a sharing of complete experience, Astrea's lifetime of rejection, her exile, her discovery of acceptance with Elias, and the flourishing of her abilities through their connection. Every person in the clearing experienced her journey from brokenness to wholeness, from shame to self-acceptance, from isolation to love. When the telepathic surge subsided, Astrea stood transformed. Her bioluminescence no longer flickered uncertainly but pulsed with powerful, intricate patterns that even Theron and his guards seemed to find awe-inspiring. Her breathing, typically labored, had steadied remarkably. I am neither a specimen to be studied, she stated aloud, her voice weak but audible for the first time since Elias had known her, nor a political token to be exchanged. I am Princess Astrea of Luminara and citizen by choice of Earth. The display of previously impossible abilities had created a shocked silence. Commander Theron was the first to recover, dropping to one knee in a formal Luminaran gesture of respect. The Council were unaware of the extent of your evolution, Princess, he said carefully. This changes diplomatic calculations significantly. Director Collins seemed equally shaken. Professor Morgan was right, she admitted reluctantly. We've been approaching this all wrong. In the tense negotiation that followed, a temporary compromise emerged. Astrea would return to Luminara for 42 Earth days, enough time to establish her status, engage in diplomatic discussions, and secure rights for herself and potentially for future relations between the planets. Elias would remain on Earth, continuing his work but with the threat of governmental interference removed. As twilight descended on the mountain forest, Elias and Astrea stood at the edge of the meadow where the Luminaran vessel waited, its previously hidden form now fully visible, an elegant ship of curved lines and translucent surfaces that seemed to capture and redirect light itself. I will return, Astrea promised, her hand pressed against Elias's cheek, her skin glowing with emotion. What we found cannot be broken by distance or politics. Your people need to see what you've become, Elias acknowledged, fighting to keep his voice steady. Someone who transcended their narrow definition of wholeness. I was always whole, she replied, echoing his earlier words with a smile that illuminated her entire being. You just helped me realize it. Their final kiss before separation was witnessed by representatives of two worlds, a kiss that literally glowed with the light of Astrea's awakened abilities and the depth of their connection. As she ascended the ramp into the vessel, Astrea turned back one last time. This is not an ending, her telepathic voice promised in Elias's mind alone. It is a beginning for both our worlds. The ship rose silently into the darkening sky, becoming first a bright point of light among the emerging stars, then vanishing entirely. Elias stood watching long after it had disappeared, Director Collins waiting respectfully at a distance. You really love her, Collins observed finally, not a question but a realization. More than your science could ever quantify, Elias replied quietly. Then for both your sakes, I hope this works. She handed him an official-looking document. Your new security clearance and appointment as Earth's scientific liaison for extraterrestrial contact. When she returns, if she returns, you'll be Earth's official representative. She'll return, Elias said with certainty, eyes still fixed on the stars. 42 days stretched into an eternity for Elias. The mountain cabin, once transformed by Astrea's presence, now felt hollow despite the constant activity. Government scientists came and went, studying the data she had shared while diplomatic officials prepared for potential formal relations with Luminara. Throughout it all, Elias threw himself into his new role, developing protocols for interspecies communication and drafting scientific exchange frameworks, anything to keep his mind from the ache of her absence. At night, alone beneath the stars, he would search for the faint pinprick of light near Andromeda that was her home world. Can you see me watching? He whispered to the distant stars. Can you feel me waiting? On the 41st night, as mountain snow began to dust the pines surrounding his cabin, Elias received an unexpected transmission through the advanced communication array the government had installed. The message came not as text or audio but as a distinctive pattern of light pulses, Luminaran long-range telepathic encoding. As the pattern repeated on his screen, Elias felt a familiar presence touch his mind. Weaker across the vast distance of space, but unmistakable. Elias. Tomorrow, I return not alone. The cryptic message was accompanied by coordinates, not for his cabin, but for the mountain observatory where they had first detected her arrival signal almost 6 months earlier. Dawn found Elias pacing the observatory's main platform as Director Collins and a small contingent of officials waited inside. The sky remained frustratingly empty as the morning advanced. "Our detection systems show nothing approaching," Collins noted, checking her tablet. "Are you certain of the timing?" "I'm certain of her," Elias replied simply. As if in answer to his faith, a shimmering distortion appeared directly above the observatory, far more substantial than the small pod that had brought Astrea to Earth. This was a diplomatic vessel, its elegant curves gleaming in the winter sunlight as it materialized fully, then descended to hover just above the observatory platform. A ramp extended, and figures began to emerge. First came Luminaran guards in ceremonial rather than tactical armor, their skin pulsing with formal patterns of diplomatic greeting. Then a pair of regal figures whose elaborate bioluminescent markings identified them as royalty, Astrea's parents, Elias realized, his heart thundering in his chest. And finally, Astrea herself. She had changed in ways both subtle and profound. Her posture carried new confidence, her movements more fluid without the breathing apparatus she had always required. Most strikingly, her skin now glowed with intricate patterns of light that rivaled her parents' in complexity while remaining uniquely her own, spiraling designs that seemed to echo both the cosmic patterns of distant galaxies and the mathematical principles she and Elias had explored together. Their eyes met across the platform, and without regard for protocol, Elias moved toward her as she broke from the formal procession to meet him halfway. "You're not wearing your breathing apparatus," he observed, hands hovering uncertainly before her radiant form. "I no longer need it," she replied, her telepathic voice strong and clear in his mind while her vocal speech, though still soft, had gained strength. "My transformation continues. The royal physicians believe my connection with you somehow activated dormant genetic pathways." She took his hands in hers, and the moment their skin touched, her luminescence brightened visibly, drawing murmurs of astonishment from her royal entourage. "I've missed you," Elias whispered, suddenly oblivious to the diplomatic summit unfolding around them. "Every night, I watched your star." "And I felt you," she answered, raising one hand to his cheek. "Across the void, I felt you." Their reunion was interrupted by the formal approach of her parents. Up close, the king and queen of Luminera were even more imposing, tall, regal beings whose every movement created cascading patterns of light beneath their skin. Yet their expressions, once Elias learned to read them, showed not arrogance but curiosity and perhaps a hint of contrition. "Professor Morgan," the queen greeted him in flawless English. "We come to thank you for seeing what we could not. My daughter's transformation has caused our medical council to re-evaluate our entire understanding of Luminaran physiology," the king added. "Those with similar conditions are being reassessed across our world." Formal introductions and diplomatic proceedings followed, moving inside the observatory as snow began to fall more heavily. Earth officials presented their proposals for cultural and scientific exchange, while the Luminaran delegation outlined potential technological sharing, carefully restricted to medical and environmental applications rather than weaponry or propulsion systems. Throughout the negotiations, Elias noticed Astrea's quiet confidence as she occasionally corrected misconceptions from either side or suggested compromise solutions. She had become a bridge between worlds in more ways than one. When the formal sessions concluded for the day, Astrea led Elias to a private observation deck overlooking the snow-covered mountains, the sunset painting the landscape in colors that reminded him of the first light he had seen pulse beneath her skin. "They've asked me to serve as Luminera's permanent ambassador to Earth," she revealed, her bioluminescence shifting to patterns he now recognized as excitement mixed with uncertainty. "I would divide my time between worlds." Elias's heart leapt at the implications. "And what did you tell them?" "That my answer depended on Earth's ambassador to Luminera," she replied with a smile that literally illuminated her features. "They're considering a scientific liaison who understands our biology and culture intimately." "Funny coincidence," Elias said, pulling a small box from his pocket. I received a similar offer this morning. Inside the box lay not a ring, but a small crystal that pulsed with soft blue light, a Luminaran bonding token, he explained, that he had been working to create with the help of her people's scientific information. It's not perfect, he admitted. The light patterns aren't as complex as a traditional token. It's beautiful because it's unique, Astrea countered, taking the crystal with reverent hands. Like us. That evening, as diplomatic teams from both worlds worked through technical details, Elias and Astrea returned to his cabin, their cabin, for the first time since their separation. The familiar surroundings heightened the intensity of their reunion as they rediscovered each other's bodies with both the eagerness of separated lovers and the wonder of explorers charting newly evolved territory. Astrea's transformation had enhanced her sensitivity to touch, while her stronger telepathic abilities created deeper communion between them. As they moved together, her bioluminescence responded with increasingly complex patterns that spread to encompass them both in a cocoon of living light. I never imagined, she gasped both aloud and telepathically as pleasure built between them, that I could feel so complete. At the peak of their passion, something miraculous occurred. A resonance between her bioluminescence and his bioelectrical field created a temporary shared consciousness where neither knew where one ended and the other began. For precious moments, they existed as a single being experiencing the universe through two perspectives simultaneously. In the aftermath, they lay entwined as softly glowing particles of light continued to dance across their skin, not just hers now, but his as well, as if some essential quality had transferred between them. The physicians would find this fascinating, Astrea murmured against his chest. The physicians are not invited to this particular research project, Elias replied with a laugh, drawing her closer. 3 days later, beneath the observatory dome with representatives from both worlds in attendance, they formalized their union in a ceremony that blended traditions from Earth and Luminara. Elias wore a suit embedded with bioluminescent fibers that responded to his emotions, while Astrea wore a gown of flowing earth silk that complemented rather than concealed the light patterns across her skin. The ceremony culminated in the exchange of the crystal Elias had created and a matching one Astrea had brought from her world. As they held the crystals together, Astrea's bioluminescence reached unprecedented brilliance, temporarily overwhelming the observatory sensors and bathing all present in blue-white radiance that seemed to connect everyone for a moment in a network of shared understanding. Director Collins, who had once sought to study Astrea as a specimen, was among the first to congratulate them. "I've been in science long enough to recognize when I've witnessed something revolutionary," she admitted. "What exists between you two isn't just love, it's a new frontier of possibility." In the years that followed, Elias and Astrea established the Interstellar Cultural Exchange, with dual headquarters in Colorado's mountains and a newly constructed facility on Luminara. Their unique bond made them ideal translators not just of language, but of perspective between species. Under Astrea's guidance, Luminaran medicine revolutionized its approach to developmental differences, recognizing latent potential where they had once seen only deficiency. On Earth, insights from their relationship helped reshape human understanding of communication disorders and neurological differences. But perhaps their greatest legacy came in the form of the children they eventually welcomed, not biological offspring, but young people from both worlds with various physical and neurological differences who found in Elias and Astrea's home a place where their unique perspectives were valued rather than merely accommodated. On warm summer evenings, visitors to the mountain might glimpse an extraordinary sight, a gathering on the wide deck of the expanded cabin, where beings from two worlds shared stories and knowledge beneath the stars. At the center, always, sat Elias and Astrea, their hands typically entwined, soft light pulsing between them, a living testament to the power of seeing beyond surface differences to the true brilliance within. "You know what still amazes me?" Elias asked one such evening, decades into their journey together, as they watched the first Luminaran Earth collaborative research vessel prepare for launch from a nearby facility. "What?" Astrea asked, her violet eyes, barely changed by time, meeting his. "That all of this," he gestured toward the gathering, the ship, the legacy they had built, began because one princess without light and one lonely human who spent too much time staring at stars somehow found each other across the vastness of space. Astria's bioluminescence rippled with the pattern he had long since learned meant deepest love. "Perhaps we were never truly without light," she suggested, resting her head against his shoulder as they gazed upward at the infinite possibilities twinkling above. "Perhaps we simply needed someone who could see it, even when it seemed invisible to everyone else, even ourselves." And as if in answer, the stars seemed to pulse a little brighter in the velvet darkness, echoing the light that had always existed between worlds, waiting only to be discovered by those with the vision to see beyond the surface to the radiance within.